Good afternoon, everybody. For such a broad topic, I guess I've really got to crack on. I was asked to share how Bruichladdich are tackling heat and energy. In relation to that, I thought I'd like to offer at least our journey to date. I guess it should be stated from the outset that this is our journey, and other distilleries and industries in Islay will have their own journeys too. And this journey for us remains a work in progress. Yes, we're absolutely underway. However, the destination is not in sight yet. I'm also sorry, I might have to admit that I'd expect this session to raise more questions than it actually answers. Next slide, please. Okay, so my approach this afternoon, I thought I would separate our journey down to 3 distinct stages. The first stage is our to-be energy ambitions, what they could look like and what their impact would be. Secondly, looking at how we understand where we are today, our as-is position of current processes. And then a review of the unique challenges presented by the gap between where we are today and where we want to be, and the challenges we're going to face to narrow that gap. And then finally, we'll have a quick summary of what we've discussed. So next slide, please. To be, well, simply put, we want to be more sustainable in all that we do. Now, an ambition that supports this goal is to decarbonise our distilling by 2025. And as you'll soon see, the majority of our energy demands originate from the heat requirements of our stills. So decarbonising this part of the process would be a massive step forward for us. That's our to-be position. Now, next slide, as is. Okay, so to our as is, our current position, where are we today? Well, to manage our energy demands, we must measure them. So to that end, we've developed our own sustainability scorecard. Almost over 3 years now, we've been looking at this, in which we measure and we document, amongst other impact areas, the impact of our energy demands. Now, we can see within this scorecard very quickly that we can confirm that our distilling energy demands were essentially twofold: power and heat. So the power is the electricity that we draw from the grid, and the heat is the steam that we generate from burning medium fuel oil. Now, the overall energy demands in kilowatt hours for distilling splits down 5% for our power and 88% for the steam that we generate. So having developed a baseline set of metrics, we're able to produce a comparative set of normalized results. Now, what I mean by normalizing the data is that this will deliver an appreciation of the relationship our energy has to our LPA, our litres of pure alcohol. So we now understand the relationship that our energy input has versus the emissions that we generate associated with the litres of pure alcohol we produce. So unequivocally, we know where we stand in relation to our energy demands today. So we know where we want to be. We believe we know where we are. Next slide, please. The gap. So the difference from where we are today to where we'd like to be, quite simply, I'm saying, is the gap. And how do we narrow that gap? Well, our approach has been to build upon our understanding of the energy options, the vast array of renewable energy options and technologies that could be applicable. We documented and published a renewable ambitions energy brief some time ago with the support from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. This subsequently led us to commission what you can see on the left-hand side here is a phase 1 renewable energy feasibility study. Now, we commissioned that in order that we could assess the range of potential renewable energy technologies that we could implement specifically at Bruichladdich Distillery here on Islay. Now, we did actually start off with over 20 different renewable technologies, but the phase 1 feasibility study quickly became 13, as you can see. Now, that renewable feasibility study is completed, and that's allowed us to look for a more selective and more appropriate set of technologies with a far more focused lens, a more in-depth and more detailed review, and that's our phase 2. Incidentally, our project kickoff for phase 2 starts at the end of this week. At the same time, to help narrow the gap, we're also independently reviewing the potential of hydrogen, along with a consortium of colleagues, as you might have seen recently in the published Wheelhouse project. Next slide, please. Now, unfortunately, we do not have enough time to explore every single challenge that we've uncovered during our phase 1 study. However, we can look at a small subset, which fits perfectly onto one slide. Hopefully you'll see there's no technology without its challenges. So I'm going to highlight a few challenges. I can't go through, as I say, them all. If we look at a renewable technology that supports our demand for heat, and say, for example, we look at fuel switching, the second row down, we have challenges with emissions. Dependent upon the alternative to medium fuel oil that a distillery selects, that could only deliver a 5% emission reduction or a 90% emission reduction, depending on what you select. And then the availability of an alternative fuel. Well, how available is an alternative fuel if it's not stocked locally? And we need a guarantee of supply. That's absolutely fundamental. Continue on that same line, infrastructure. If there was an alternative fuel supply with the volumes that distilleries require, an additional depot to hold that fuel, an additional infrastructure that supports the distribution of that fuel would also be required. And subsidy, well, there are schemes that exist that will financially support biofuels, for example, when used for transport. But that same fuel, if it's used to raise heat, there's no support for it. I'd also like to have a look at, for want of a different topic, biomass. Let's have a look at that. So some of the challenges we uncovered with biomass availability. We require a regular and reliable fuel supply for biomass to work, and that would have to come via another third party. And if that third party is not local, then it would have to be imported. I think enough said to that. Infrastructure, we would require a substantial upgrade to the distillery, and it would require specialised planned maintenance to operate a biomass energy centre. Again, going along location, this requires considerable footprint. The area would be massive to store the fuel and accommodate the actual biomass energy centre. We're talking the size of a football field, if not more. Planning, absolutely, a biomass solution would require and be subject to planning applications, no doubt. And subsidies, well, the economics, I believe, of a biomass scheme are heavily dependent upon the subsidies that are available. And any costs would significantly increase without subsidised support. For example, a subsidy which could support biomass solution is called RHI, or the non-domestic renewable heat incentive. Now, unfortunately, that's going to close to new applicants at the end of next month. And at this point, there's no visibility of replacement of that subsidy. And let's pick one from power, some of the challenges that we've identified. Onshore wind. So that's a turbine placed on Islay or in and around Islay somewhere. And I'm assuming that with onshore wind, we'd have a direct connection from that generation to the distillery in this scenario. So availability of power from that renewable, well, that's going to be subject to weather conditions. And also, is it always going to be available when our demand is present? And do we need to consider an energy store for the power when it's generated and there is no demand? Because that then introduces perhaps batteries or other technologies. So quite a complex one for us. Infrastructure, you'll immediately understand, to support a connection to the distillery, the local grid or the local grid or the extended grid requires a review. Location for a direct connection, proximity, the point of use is key. I can't really see how a direct connection at this point could host a massive wind turbine right next to the distillery. Planning, there's going to be numerous planning issues, which makes this a medium to high risk technology to pursue. And again, subsidies, well, the changing nature of the subsidy landscape, albeit we heard from Minister Paul Wheelhouse, that seems to be a positive change. But It could also render some of these renewable technologies uneconomical if the support is actually withdrawn. So next slide, please. In summary, what I'd like to say is we've definitely looked at where we'd like to be. Yes, we want to be more sustainable in all that we do. We know our as-is position and the relationship we have with energy. And we're building a greater appreciation of the gap, and that's due to the renewable and some of the other feasibility studies that we're performing. I believe it's widely recognised that continued reliance on energy derived from fossil fuel brings unwanted and well-documented set of challenges. And as suggested, these renewable energy technologies may come with a set of their own challenges. However, they are supported by the desire to make responsible and sustainable improvements in our energy consumption. And it's on that point I'd like to thank you for your time and hand the session back to Paul. My thanks.
Right, AJ. Ooh. You still there? Yeah, you are.
Yes.
Good. Okay, I had a couple of questions. Not all of them easy. Just for us, those that understand, would you say the challenges you're facing are typical challenges that most distilleries face, or are you unusual?
No, I would say that these are universal challenges. Yeah. Absolutely. If you look around at all the distilleries here in Islay, they would face similar issues and similar constraints that are documented. Yeah. And
do you have a published target, a strategic target of what you're seeking to achieve by when, or is it to use the Scottish Government term in relation to 2045, a journey towards? Do you trying to get to a specific place by a specific point in time? Or is it,
yeah, categorically. I'll reiterate again, our aim is by 2025 to decarbonize our distilling.
Absolutely. And are you optimistic about that?
Yes, personally, I'm optimistic. There's no point going into a challenge being pessimistic. Absolutely, we will achieve it. I'd like to think we can beat that.
And would you say that's so? But if that's achieved, and the majority of distillers on Islay achieve that, that is a significant change in the nature of what happens.
Yeah, without being too flippant, I don't think it's something we can achieve by ourselves. I do think it requires collaboration. We've always looked at this from a mindset of a short term, a medium term, and a long term. Now, the short term for us is 2025. Medium term, I think, would allow collaboration amongst all the distilleries by about 2030. And I think by 2040 and beyond, we could realise an entire energy system that supports not just industry, but that wider community on Islay and Jura and Colonsay.
Do you think the points that George was making about the local control and ownership of the grid is aligned with the objectives you have? They can sit happily together, and there's a shared benefit that come forward. You both going in the same direction.
Ultimately, the availability to cheap and reliable energy, which is decarbonised as best as it can be, is our focus and our goal. And if that means a supported local energy provider as opposed to a distant energy provider, I think we're happy to introduce conversations with all parties.
Excellent. One of the things that strikes me as potentially as a negative factor, if I may say that, is which might be a function of your success for the local community, is that the more successful you are, the more quickly you might exacerbate the restriction on the delivery of other fuels to Islay as the supply to you becomes less efficient. Is that a realistic prospect, or do you think you could actually catalyse a problem for others? And that's something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. In every decision that we make, Bruichladdich, we're weighing up. We're not quite doing a life cycle assessment on the benefits of every decision we make, but we are weighing up the impact that decision has on the environment versus the actual impact it has on the pocket. So does it make financial sense, for example, to have a massive bottling hall here in Islay? Financial sense, no. Community sense, absolutely. We're able to employ an extended number of individuals from the community and provide careers for them. So that's weighing up what's right for us based on our values versus what's right for pounds, shilling and pence. And for us, the values takes precedence.
Okay, AJ, a couple of questions that come in from the group we have here today. Are there other distilleries off Islay who have already achieved the decarbonised distilling process so far? Is this happening elsewhere in Scotland already?
Absolutely. There are other distilleries that are significantly further ahead in their journeys than we are, and they should be applauded for that. Absolutely.
But do they have natural geographic other advantages that possibly you have more issues with? More of a challenge?
Yeah, so I've only been in Islay for years now, and I tend not to use this phrase very often, but yes, they're on the mainland. They have access to significantly more infrastructure and support than we do here on Islay.
Absolutely, but they're not producing Islay whiskey, are they?
No, they're not. This is very true.
Absolutely. And another question we just had coming from Rachel is offshore wind too far away in programme terms to support the decarbonisation of distilling? You've got to deal with it another way.
Good question. I would say that what we're looking at is a stepping stone approach to our ultimate goal. There is no one renewable solution that we can take today that will decarbonise everything. We need to take an escalator approach. So, for example, perhaps we reduce our reliance on a fossil fuel. We look at a more biorenewable fuel, and that extends the period of time that we have to make a final decision on a more complicated set of arrangements. So offshore wind, yes, undoubtedly that would take significantly longer to arrive here on Islay because of the infrastructure demands and perhaps the policies we've got to go through. But that doesn't mean that we can't make a change today. And the benefit is the environment will be removed from the harmful emissions that we have.
Okay, my final point I want to raise therefore is goes back to one of the workshops this afternoon and a point raised by the Minister, which is the level of awareness. I know that you went through a quite extensive workshop process with all your staff to try and get a better level of awareness. What level did you find at the start of that process, and what lessons can you share with all of us about how you communicated to your immediate community about the issues you had to tackle?
Well, the majority of our staff are in the immediate community. And as you rightly point out, we did have an internal sustainability workshop, and that was part of our drive to understand whether or not everybody was on the same page. So we sat down, we were talking about all sorts of renewables. We're looking at offshore wind, onshore wind, we're looking at power supplies, batteries. We talked about the origins of some of the minerals within batteries that a lot of the staff weren't aware of. So just the fact that we began a discussion allowed us to raise the awareness of the journey and the values that the distillery were on. So just having that discussion was important for us.
Good. One very final quick point there, for we've just been asked. New generation hydropower that can be provided locally doesn't require mountains. Was that something that figured in your stage one feasibility, and how did it fare?
Yeah, so one of the 13 indeed was hydro. Unfortunately, next to us we do have the Bruichladdich River, and to own the energy that we produce, if it can be generated as close to the distillery as possible. So the closest asset that we have to the distillery is the Bruichladdich River. And unfortunately, we don't have the head of water in the fall to generate significant enough, i.e. the investment it would take for the returns massively outweigh any benefits.
Thank you very much indeed. We're bang on time again. AJ, thank you very much.
Welcome.
I don't know whether you're going to go and add your wisdom to the distillery workshop